Hello learners and welcome to this class. We are going to continue with our topic for last week, which is on land degradation, but today we are going to focus on soil degradation. As I talked about and I promised last week, today we are going to start with a distinguishing of what is land degradation and what is soil degradation. Land degradation usually is has a wider scope than soil erosion or soil degradation, in that it covers all negative changes in the capacity of the ecosystem. Remember, we are talking about the ecosystem to provide goods and services, including biological and water-related goods and services. That is land degradation. Therefore, soil degradation is just a small part of land degradation, considering we are only looking at the land resources, while land degradation covers a wider scope on both natural, man-made, land, water, biological, or even soil-related ecosystems. Therefore, when we are to distinguish between land and soil degradation, is that land covers soil degradation is part of land degradation because land degradation has got a wider scope, and we will see that some of these aspects we looked at last week on land degradation are also common to soil degradation, meaning that soil degradation is part of land degradation, but it is not land degradation. Often these terms are used synonymously, but there is a difference between them. In this class, we are going to recall on what is a soil. We are going to discuss on what is soil degradation, the types of soil degradation, the causes of soil degradation, and the impacts of soil degradation. From our previous classes, we have learned that soil is the upper layer of the earth in which plants grow. Often it is the one that anchors the crops, and it consists of a mixture of clay, rock particles, and organic matter. It is one of the natural resources alongside air and water. So, what is soil degradation? It is the inability of soil to support the growth of plants. Look, we are only talking about soil, no other part of the ecosystem, only the soil. Soil degradation is the inability of the soil to support, not the soil is not able to support the growth of crops. It is usually as a result of the decline in the quality of water, in the quality of soil, as a result of various causes. Some of these could be either human or natural causes, as we will see later in this class. And from what we know, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization, it is a very serious environmental problem of modern day, and therefore addressing it by understanding what are its causes, what are its impacts, and what are solutions towards avoiding it is very crucial according to the Food and Agricultural Organization. There are three types of soil degradation. Number one is what we call as the chemical degradation, there is physical degradation, and there is biological degradation. Chemical degradation usually is the loss of nutrients or organic matter. It is also consists of what we refer to as acidification of soils, soils having excess acids, that is having a low pH compared to the normal buffering pH. Also, there is another to the extreme of acidification is salinization, where the soils have got excess salts, that is, they have got a very high pH compared to the normal buffering pH. There is also what we call as the acid sulfate soil, a kind of pollution that occurs in the soil, and overall, chemical degradation also refers to soil pollution. In our next classes, we'll be looking at acidification, salinization, and soil pollution. However, in this class, we are just going to introduce these in brief and understand what they are. The loss of nutrients, for instance, is the removal of nutrients. and it reduces the capacity of soils to support plants since there is decreased soil fertility, and the result is a decreased crop yield. The hardening of iron and aluminum rich clays into hard pans also leads to a result of loss of nutrients. This is because the normal soil formation processes of leaching, elevation, and elevation do not occur since the soil is not aerated in the presence of hard pans. The reduction of soil nutrients also may be due to acidity, as we will see in our next classes, and also waterlogging, the fact that there is excess water on the surface, and usually it prevents the entry or the exchange of air. And if soils are not well aerated, so is the ability to exchange the various nutrients in their ionic form. Another problem that relates to soil degradation or results to chemical soil degradation is salinization. That is, the increase in the salt content in the soils is what we refer to as soil salinization, and usually it occurs naturally in some soils and as a result of water, but could also be caused by anthropogenic activities. When I talk of it being natural in the soils, some of the soils, especially the aridisols, as we saw the different types of soils, the aridisols are naturally salty, they are naturally saline because of where they come from. Considering when you look at the case of arid areas is that there is a lot of evaporation. And if you want to get a lot of salts on the soil surface, the best way is that once it rains, you evaporate the water, and what you are left with is a concentrated salt solution. Hence, the soils in arid areas are vulnerable to salinization. Also, some practices such as the irrigation usually, and we will see this when we'll be talking in details on salinization, is one, the improper use of water or improper irrigation is often the common result of salinization, especially in soils that are found in arid areas. Also, during the process of mineral weathering, as we saw in the processes of leaching, elevation, and elevation, or the translocation of various minerals, it can result to the salinization of soils. There is also what we refer to as the acid sulfate soil. Acid sulfates are naturally occurring soil sediments or organic substrates that are formed when under waterlogged condition. That is, when the soil, when there's excess water in the environment, so that there is flooding and the soil is covered with what on the surface is covered with water. The problem with acid sulfate is that it releases what we call as sulfuric acid to the soil, which in turn releases other ions such as aluminium, iron, and heavy metals, particularly arsenic. Though it is not a metal, it is a transitional metal. It is also released as a result of acid sulfate. That is, we are saying in waterlogged or flooded areas, there is usually a likelihood of acid sulfate, so that there is a release of sulfuric acid, iron, aluminium, and other heavy metals such as arsenic. And this is as a result of the reaction of the various components of the soil and the soil organic matter with water. The problem with this acid sulfate is that it degrades the vegetation, and it can seep into groundwater, causing pollution on groundwater. And you will realize that in modern day, groundwater is growing to be a very important resource of fresh water, considering that most of the surface water has been polluted. Therefore, this acid sulfate is very dangerous. It has the capacity to pollute or acidify groundwater, making it no longer fresh or suitable for consumption or consumptive uses. The other aspect we will look at in detail in the subsequent classes, and is also a cause of chemical soil degradation, is soil pollution. Soil pollution also is part of land degradation. it is caused by the presence of human-made chemicals or other alterations in natural soil. Usually it is as a result of industrial activities, the use of agrochemicals, and what we call as landfilling or the improper landfilling or dumping or the improper disposal of solid waste. And this we will look into details when we'll be looking at soil pollution. However, at this stage you need to understand it is one of the causatives of chemical soil degradation. There's also what we call as physical degradation of soils, and this occurs in four forms. It could be water lodging, compacting, sealing, and crusting, or lowering of the water table, and mining and urbanization. Water lodging usually occurs when there is excessive irrigation on poorly drained soils. Hence, it results to water logging as you can see here. And usually, when we were looking at the soils, we talked of the vertisols or what we refer to as the black cotton soils. And you will realize that these soils, due to their swelling shrink characteristics, as you can refer to those notes, due to their swelling shrink characteristics, they get to a point where they are poorly drained, and at this stage, this is where we say that the soil is waterlogged. As you can see here, there is waterlogging. This occurs as a common case in poorly drained soils where water cannot penetrate deeply, and water can also fail to penetrate in case there is formation of hard pans that do not allow the infiltration of water. For example, if there is an impermeable clay layer below the soil, or what we refer to as a hard pan, it could deter the water from getting into the subsoil. Hence, it lunges on the surface or logs on the surface. There is also what we refer to as compacting, sealing, and crusting, and this results to a physical manipulation of the normal soil so that it forms a new structure, or the soil tilled is not we normally would normally be used for productive crop growth. These three are related. However, there are some differences in their in their description. For example, soil compaction decreases decrease in is a decrease in space between the soil particles due to externally or internally applied loads. And this, when we were looking at the case of land degradation, we saw the use of machinery or the continuous tilling of land could cause compaction. Then there is what we call a soil sealing, is the covering of the ground by an impassable material and is one of the main causes of soil degradation. For instance, during construction, is that the various soil layers will be turned, and usually some of them consist rocks. And these rocks, usually when they are covered with other soil parts, they cannot be seen, and hence they deter the movement of water. That is what we call as soil sealing. There is also what we call as soil crusting. It is a thin layer. A crust is a thin layer of dense and tough material. Usually it is more or less the same as compaction or soil sealing, but there are materials that are underlying and have been packed. This is in the case of improper solid waste management, or what we refer to as landfills. Usually when we put waste into a well-designed landfill, is that the waste is compacted, and once it is compacted, it is covered with soil. At that stage, you cannot grow crops there because there is already soil crusting, and the normal soil structure has already been interfered with. Usually, the three, compacting, sealing, and crusting, increase the runoff and decrease the infiltration of water so that it is no longer available for uptake by crops. And this has an overall negative effect on production. Mining and urbanization is also another physical soil degradation cause. Usually, surface mining requires the removal of the topsoil and the turning of the various soil layers. These could cause a disruption in the normal structure of the soil. Urbanization also results to the creation of informal settlements on lands that were initially agricultural lands. These lands, therefore, cannot, even if they moved, they can no longer be recovered from their original structure. Remember that these constructions also involve the constructions in urban areas, the construction of roads, construction of houses, construction of companies, also involve the turning of soils, the cutting down of trees, the removal of top layer, and also the destruction of plant and animal species that could be found in soil. This is part of soil degradation. There is also what we refer to as biological soil degradation. And this biological soil degradation often affects the soil micro and macrofauna. That is, the small plants and animals that are found in soil. They are normally affected so that they reduce their biological and microbial activities, and this affects the soil adversely. Remember in our previous classes when we were talking about soil organic matter, it is as a result of the reactions of the various or the biological activity of the various microfauna in the soil or microflora and microfauna in the soil. Without these, which we are referring to as biological degradation, then the crop productivity or what we are calling as the top layer and the O horizon would not be there. Ultimately, there's a reduction of yields. The application of agrochemicals, pesticides, these have got a negative effect on the biological degradation because they prevent the nitrogen cycling, particularly the nitrification process. The disposal of improper disposal of wastes also contaminates the soil using oils, heavy metals, and spillages of oil, and ultimately affect the microfauna because they interfere with their aeration. What are the causes of soil degradation? After realizing that there is what we call as the chemical, the physical, and the biological soil degradation, what causes these three kinds of soil degradation to occur? The, the causes are more or less the same as what we discussed about land degradation. The immediate causes or the biophysical factors is the topography that determines how the faster the rate or the vulnerability of soils to soil erosion. There is also what we call as climatic conditions. For instance, temperature. As we have seen, the effect of soils being saline is as a result of soil temperature, particularly in arid areas. There is also the aspect of rainfall. Rainfall has the capacity to, depending on on how heavy or how fast or how strong, it has the capacity to carry away the O and A horizons of the soil. The wind too also determines how vulnerable a soil is to erosion. There is also unsustainable land management practices, just as we saw in the case of land degradation. Aspects such as soil nutrient mining, that is the overuse of soils without fertilizing them, deforestation, the cutting down of trees, which in this case we are referring to as carbon sinks, and the sources that bring us rain, and the cultivation of steep slopes. Remember, when we were looking at land degradation, one of the solutions we say to land degradation was the use of in steep areas we were supposed to have a particular form of cultivation where we ensure that the soils do not become vulnerable to erosion. That is, do not cultivate along the slope, rather cultivate across the slope and ensure that at each slope there is what we call as enough crop cover. And this is where I was referring to the use of napier grass that helps in the reduction of soil erosion. There is also the use of sweet potato vines and other cover crops, the use of legumes to ensure that in steep slopes that are vulnerable to soil erosion, the soil is protected so that once there is rainfall, the soil is not carried away. But what are the impacts of soil erosion, soil degradation? The impacts of soil degradation, the effect of degradation usually has not been detected as a very serious global problem even up to now. But its localized effects, that is, in terms of crop food supply, crop production, especially in developing countries, or what we call as the ASALs, the arid and semi-arid areas, is very huge. Cumulatively, soil degradation is a very serious problem of modern day. The costs of degradation of soil degradation, for instance, it results to 5 to 10 between 5 to 10% production loss. It could also cause 20% production loss, which we refer to as moderate. On the extreme, it could even cause 75 or up to 100% loss in crop productivity. The impacts also affect the food systems. And you see, we were talking about last week that with land degradation, which includes soil degradation, the modern day population is growing and the demand for food is growing. And other environmental factors prompted by climate change are also on the rise. And to strike a balance, we must look for ways to ensure that we do not degrade our soils so that they can be sustainable. They can feed the population of today and the future. So, what the use of fertilizers also, what we have referred to as unscientific irrigation practices and the use of machineries. See, we have pointed them as causes of various forms of soil degradation, whether it is physical, chemical, or biological. Degradation, therefore, makes soils irresponsive to inputs, or what we call as soil conditioners, so that even if you try to rehabilitate a soil that is degraded, it is very difficult, very costly, and the cost is not even worth the product you're getting. This means that if we do not address the soil degradation problem as for now, the future means that they will find soils that are not responsive to input and have got zero or almost zero inability to produce. Some of the impacts when you look at this presentation that I have put here according to the ELD in 2015, some of the impacts of soil degradation include water shortages. And why water shortages? Because when you do like unscientific irrigation practices, you will use so much water, cause the soils to become saline, and therefore the investment of a lot of water will not be worth it because the product you will get will even be worse than if you had not irrigated. There is also what we are referring to as the yield reduction. That is the ability, the productivity of crops is reduced. There is also what we refer to as the dust storm. Usually, with soil degradation, the capacity to support plants is also reduced, and therefore, most of the the cover crops that prevent a lot of dust, us from being exposed from a lot of dust, is not there, and therefore we are vulnerable to dust storms. And this also occurs and forces people to have serious health complications or health disorders, some allergies, diseases such as asthma. There is also what we refer to as forced migration, and this you will realize that it occurs if people, considering in developing countries of sub-Saharan Africa, in which Kenya is part, we rely so much on agriculture. And if a certain community lives in an area that is not productive, they are likely to move so that they can look for alternative means of what they refer to as the apparent low income as a result of soil degradation. And also, on the extreme, it is likely to result to conflicts. When I talk of conflicts, is disagreements between the various communities or the various individuals in a community in the fight for land. In this country in particular, there are apparent conflicts on land as a result of soil degradation. That is, you have got at a family level, you have got land that is areas that are known to be degraded by soil, while others are not. People, of course, will prefer those that are not degraded for their productivity and income. Who is that who would want land that is not that is degraded? Therefore, everybody will scramble for what is productive and leave what is not productive, or what is degraded will not be preferred to what is fertile. Therefore, there will be conflicts. And this we have seen. Remember, see communities like those of the Turkana counties where they keep fighting on who is going to get the better piece of the land. Or even at family level, people are killing each other over a piece of land, or a consistent land argument as a result of soil degradation. Therefore, this is a very serious problem that must be addressed. And remember, the solutions to soil degradation, we did talk about them last week when we were looking at the solutions to land degradation. And in this class, I wanted to show you how serious the problem of soil degradation is. This is a map of our country, Kenya, and you can see that most of the lands either fall in the very severe hazard or moderate hazard of soil degradation. When you look at areas that are non-hazard, they are very few, very few. And in this case, they are found in arid areas that are not productive. Look at this green path here. That is naturally they are not productive. They cannot have any capability to produce, and therefore they cannot be degraded. But look at the productive areas that are found mainly in the Mount Kenya region. Most of them fall under the category of very severe or severe hazard to soil degradation. I looked at some of the statistics to show you how serious the problem of soil degradation has been, depending on the various provinces we have in this country. And when you look at this, these are the original provinces we had. This is the forest cover that has been lost, the shrub that has been lost, the cropland, the grassland, the woodland, and areas that are barren, or areas that have been converted to barren. And when you look at the totals here, look at the totals here, it is very disappointing. The only positive thing we can say is that areas that have been converted to cropland, grassland, and woodland have increased. This is a positive aspect towards alleviating land degradation. However, look at the overall effect. The overall effect is that we have lost so much, 667 hectares of land within a period of 10 years. We have lost it as a result of soil degradation. So you can imagine if we project in the next like 50 years up to 2050, we will have serious food crisis in this country if we do not do something today. I have also attached in the notes one of a book chapter on the economics of land degradation and improvement in Kenya, which is giving you the various statistics, updated statistics as of 2016 on what was the status of land degradation, including soil degradation in this country. The authors also have suggested ways in which they can improve land degradation in this country. I am kindly requesting you to have a look at it, read and understand some of the concepts that have been listed in that book chapter. Thank you.